wasn't enough for Ahithophel to give Absalom bad advice, but he also wanted to lead an army to actually pursue David that very night, to terrify him and all those with him when they were weary and exhausted from their trip. But he would only kill David, he said, and bring the rest of the people back to serve Absalom. Now that's quite an offer. So let's see what happens. Hi, I'm Ken Godevanis, and this is Digging for Scriptural Gems. Today we're looking at chapter 17 of 2 Samuel, verses 1 to 14. That's 2 Samuel, chapter 17, verses 1 to 14. Now, Ahithophel was smart enough to know he couldn't lead such a group of soldiers as he was asking for, 12,000 of them himself, and so he advised Absalom to pick a strong leader, as everything would depend upon him. Absalom and those with him thought the plan to be a good idea. Now that becomes important in a moment. Absalom liked the idea, but wanted a second opinion. And who does he ask for to get that? But Hushai, David's friend. The plot thickens. Absalom tells Hushai Ahithophel's advice and asks if he agrees with him, and if not, what does he advise? Well, Hushai says that this time the advice of Ahithophel is not good. In fact, he suggested that Absalom should know what warriors David, his father, and his men are, and right now they were like a mama bear robbed of her cubs. So look out. He tells him that David is hiding somewhere right now and just waiting to pounce on Absalom's people and slaughter them. He further tells him that even your chosen valiant men will lose heart under those conditions. It's best, Absalom, if you just take it easy and wait a bit. Instead, Hushai advised Absalom that he gather men from all Israel and lead the battle himself. And that way, Hushai says, we shall attack him and leave no one standing. Notice the we there, trying to align himself with the side of Absalom. That way, Absalom would show what a leader and a warrior he was. And if David withdraws into the city, Hushai says, we will go after him with ropes into the city. Now, Robert Jameson informs us that in besieging a town, hooks or cranes were often thrown upon the walls or turrets surrounding the town, by which, with ropes attached to them, the besiegers, uniting all their force, pulled down the fortifications or pulled down the walls in a mass of ruins. So to summarize, Ahithophel says, attack now with 12,000 men. Hushai says, attack later after you get all of Israel to fight with you. Now the last verse of our passage, verse 14, is most interesting. The first part tells us that Absalom and his men decided, on reflection, that Hushai's advice was better than Ahithophel's. But then comes the second part of the verse, and I love this. It says that they decided that, and here it comes, because the Lord had ordained to thwart the good counsel of Ahithophel in order that the Lord might bring calamity to Absalom. Wow. Every word is key in 2 Samuel chapter 17, verse 14, part B. Let's go deeper. The first thing we note is that Ahithophel, still harboring his bitterness, primarily for what David had done to his granddaughter Bathsheba, even though it was, I believe, an affair of mutual consent between two adults, he is still hell-bent on having David killed over that. However, there is yet another gem in there. Look at verse 2 of this passage. Ahithophel says he would strike down only the king. Now, David Guzik says that was a slip of the tongue on Ahithophel's part. Why on earth would he still call David king? Perhaps because he knew deep down in his heart that David was still the legitimate king of Israel. Hushai's advice is based on what might have been his knowledge of David and how David fights and protects himself, or fought and protected himself in the past. His advice also takes into account the fact that if David does succeed in attacking first, the news would spread that Absalom's army was defeated and the rest of Israel would lose heart, even if that may well not have been the case at all. It's all made to sound very logical, whereas Ahithophel's advice was again based out of his sole objective to kill David and eliminate any chance of him coming back as king, which would be disastrous for himself, now a treacherous traitor. Rightly or wrongly, Absalom and his council recognized Hushai's advice as the better one upon hearing it. Hushai knew David was no longer a warrior. He had seen him feeling emotionally defeated recently, but he presented him to his son Absalom as the David he once was, the David that Absalom knew, strong and brave and courageous. And at the same time, by having Absalom take some time to collect all of Israel's men together to fight with him, he was buying time for David to get better prepared. That took a lot of courage and a lot of smarts. Oftentimes, someone gives us some advice and we jump at it as being exactly what the doctor ordered, and we look no further. It's bad enough that we don't seek God's advice, but we don't even ask others whom we know are wise and could give us some added considerations to think about. In fact, even smart doctors recommend that we should always feel free to ask for a second opinion. Sadly, many of us don't. However, let's not always assume that the second piece of advice is better. It's not. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But it's always wise to have it. And even if a third piece of advice is necessary, go for it if the first two don't agree. I did that many years ago when I had colon cancer. The doctor that cleaned it up advised me to have a good 8 inches of my colon removed just in case it ever came back. I balked. He expected that I would want a second opinion, and he was okay with that. I went for 2 second opinions. Bottom line, leave your colon intact, and a decade plus later, I'm still cancer-free. I valued the second and third opinions, but I also went to God with the matter, and he led me accordingly. But that's a different story. Turning our attention to the second part of verse 14 again, we notice several things. Number 1, it was the Lord that decided whose advice would sound better to Absalom. Stop the video and check it out. Check all of these out in a minute. Number 2, it was God who frustrated the advice of Ahithophel. Number 3, in fact, the text says Ahithophel's advice was sound. His advice was sound. Maybe it was really even better than Hushai's from a human perspective, from a military strategic perspective. Who's to say? And number 4, and God had a reason for doing all of this, to bring, sorry about the spoiler alert, to bring disaster to Absalom. Although the phrase, but God, is not in the text here, it might as well be. This was indeed a but God moment. David Gusick draws our attention to the previous advice Ahithophel had given Absalom. Do you remember it? It was back in chapter 16, verse 20 and following from there. He advised Absalom to go and sleep with his father's concubines. Here's Gusick on God's total control of the situation. He writes, quote, Absalom had the smartest man in Israel on his side, but David's prayer was mightier than Ahithophel's smarts. God led Ahithophel to give foolish counsel that was listened to earlier, as in 2 Samuel 16, verses 20 to 23. And now God allowed Ahithophel to give great advice and yet have it be rejected. God was in control. End of quote. And I add, but God. So, what's the big lesson or two for us here today? Well, perhaps there are 3. First, we always need to ask God for direction as our primary source of what to do next. Second, if you get man's opinion, get a second or third opinion as well. and go with the one that matches most closely to God's. I'm trying to be practical. And third, always look for and be ready for your but God moment. Life is more exciting that way. Next time, we'll see how Hushai tries to get the word to David. That in itself is very interesting. Join us for that. In the meantime, please share these videos with others. Pass them along. Study the Word on your own. Keep on studying God's Word on your own. Write to us, comments, questions, thoughts, whatever you'd like to say to us. And we'd really appreciate it if you liked our video and also subscribe to our YouTube channel, Digging for Scriptural Gems. Thank you again to the one or two individuals that recently subscribed, slowly getting our numbers up. God bless you and have a great day.